Dzień dobry Państwu. Zapraszam do wysłuchania naszego...
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is our 9th panel discussion during this conference, and we are still in the same line of themes, namely relations between ethnic groups, different identities, and now for something slightly different, religious aspects. So first of all, an MA student at the University of Wrocław, Mr. Rafał, who will give us a paper on the monastic community in the process of post-war resettlements, using the example of the All Saints Abbey of Benedictine nuns. 20 minutes. I will signal that. So, if we fail to address some topics, we'll address them during the discussion. Thank you for the invitation. For a young researcher, this is really a big thing. This is really important for me. And this issue of resettlements of monastic communities, using the example of the All Saints Abbey of Benedictine nuns from Lviv to Krzeszów, which actually happened in 1946. I would like to focus not so much on the very facts, but on a broader issue of resettlements and migrations and monastic migrations. So, on the one hand, that was under the international law, and on the other hand, there was voluntary migration, which we can refer to, and we can quote documents on that. But also in domestic law dictated that, or actually monastic rule, while these orders were part of the Catholic Church, they were also subject to canon law, canon code, and so basically this will focus on the Lviv Abbey of the Benedictine nuns, but for the for this purpose we have to make several assumptions. So the Lviv and Krzeszów, actually, because now it moved to Krzeszów in the Kamienna Góra powiat in Lower Silesia, we are dealing with an autonomous community with a higher superior who has full decision-making rights, has full discretion on matters concerning the organization, including disciplinary issues. And actually, this is autonomous and independent, but in some respects it is subject to international law, to the code of canon law. And third thing, the Benedictine nuns I'm discussing, they are actually a community which is obviously cut off from the reality, but not entirely. And why? Well, I will tell you in a while why this is. And I would like to, because it's a community under enclosure, but it's not entirely detached from the outside world. But I wanted to start by talking about the monastery, well, the convent in this sense. Well, this convent, obviously, we are speaking of the All Saints convent in Lviv, where the Benedictine convent is located. But in the case of Benedictine communities, subject to the rule of Saint Benedict, so many enclosure communities, and this monastery or convent is important in that the community can have a place to sleep and live, but it's actually the center, the hub, where the whole monastic life unfolds. And for the purpose of this paper, a comparison was made between the rule of Saint Benedict of Norcia with the whole settlement process or resettlement process in 1944-1947, more or less with obviously several references to the contemporary world. And I have to make one more assumption because I need to secure myself a bit. And basically you can see the rule of Saint Benedict as something that is obsolete and written much earlier than the problem of migration after the Second World War, but so as to, be able to compare this text to what went on in the years 1944, 1947, I used commentary by Karel van Oost, a Benedictine monk hailing from Belgium, who lived in the community in Tinitz, who worked with the congregation of the Benedictine nuns of the Immaculate Conception, and the Lviv convent was autonomous, so they can actually form congregations, and there the compliance with the rule of Saint Benedict of Nursia was supervised. So Karel van Oost, as a Benedictine monk who understood this law, and he was part of the events in 1946, the migration process, and so this is an adequate reference to interpret this rule of Saint Benedict with reference to the 20th century, and it's useful when we want to refer it to the resettlement of the Lviv Krzeszów Benedictine nuns convent. And if we were to give the floor to the interested party, in terms, I'm talking about Karel van Oost, he wrote the following thing: Benedictine life should emphasize the three main points: obedience, monastic life, and stability or perseverance. And so the nature of the Benedictine spirit involves perseverance and stability, because there is no family life without constancy, and we need to be attached to our monastery, and we need to learn to love the enclosure. And so the three, obviously the three vows are actually mentioned, which are the vows of chastity, poverty, and obedience, the monastic vows. And so we have the first problem, namely the vow of constancy is mentioned, and in some areas this is interpreted wrongly as constancy of the place where the respective monk or nun actually professed their vows. But if we adopted this interpretation, we'd have a problem, because in 1946 members of the Lviv Krzeszów community, they broke that rule involuntarily, but they did so. As part of the interpretation by the Tinitz Benedictines, or Benedictine monks in general, we don't have the stabilitas loci, the stability of place, that constancy or stability I'm talking about, and perseverance and constancy with regard to the community which one vows to, and also constancy in terms of the preservation of monastic life, and the vow of obedience, which is a certain attitude. But in terms of the convent itself, well, if we're talking about resettlements, we need to, well, replace, colloquially speaking, one building with another, and the problem of the utility value of that building actually appears. And the Lviv community counted around 40 people, so not any building could be used to stay, first of all due to the size, and secondly due to the other features which such a building should have. It needs to be adapted to monastic life. So a chapel or refectory should be there, or there should be the chapter house, which should actually be adapted to the activities going on there. And so there was a problem finding that place, and well, you can't just from one day to the next leave one place in search of another without any plan. So the problem appears, namely that this gives rise to certain difficulties in the scheduling of such an undertaking. So this endeavor, since the resettlement process, passing from one place to another, ended in May 1946, It had started much earlier because we were talking at least of planning ahead, 6 months ahead, actually. So in this case, the person responsible for the whole convent is Mother Superior, the prioress, in other words, the higher superior of the whole community. And others, the whole convent actually have to be obedient towards Mother Superior, because obviously we are not talking about any sort of democratic rule in or the whole power actually, well, apart from certain exceptions, which in this case do not, well, they have nothing to do and they have no influence on this process. Whole power is in the hands of a single person. In that case, Janina Szymańska, Mother Superior Prioress, and since she performed this function, she was clearly responsible for the members of the convent. She actually was elected by them. So a certain initiative, the starting point for this process of resettlement, that had to come from one specific person, and that was Mother Superior Szymańska. And as the monastic chronicles show it, our Blessed Mother actually leads us to another place where there's Benedictine convent. So the initiative was undertaken by the prioress who was responsible for the community, finding another monastery, finding another convent, or building a new structure which would be suitable. So they needed to find a place which would carry some sort of future for the whole community, because in this case the issue appeared of survival of the community in the new place, and simply speaking, certain financial security in terms of the community, in this case the Lviv Krzeszów convent. And this could be actually also referred to canon law, to the code of canon law, because we won't find it in the code of 1917, any regulation which would talk about transferring an abbey from one place to another. There are some clear principles which regulate the whole process in a certain way, which talk either about the shutting down of a monastery or convent in one place, or opening a new monastic house, a new monastery or convent in another place, after meeting these conditions. And if a new house is set up, then basically there is a specification, there is a rule or recommendation that the community must be able of well, staying and sustaining itself in the new place. So there is the ora et labora principle in the Benedictine monastic life. So pray, work and pray, basically. So the community will have to work within the monastic walls or in archives, as it happened in the past, or well, in cultivating crops and so on and so forth. So we have quite a actually we have quite a strong reforming current, especially in the female communities among the nuns, and they have been undertaking work which used to be atypical for Benedictine monks and nuns, namely running kindergartens and schools and actually working with adults. So, bearing in mind the characteristics of that, how would the new community be supposed to earn their living in the new place? Well, land would be one thing, and then they would have to find a convent, a new convent, which would provide the right income, the possibilities of earning money to the nuns. And so this is the case of the Benedictine nuns from Lviv, because when they were choosing the places, they indicated Wrocław as the first locality. Another one may be unobvious, but Staniątki, but kind of, and then Lubin near Poznań, which was nearly until the end of the resettlement process, it was considered as the final place where the Benedictine nuns were eventually to end up in. Krzeszów was not considered initially. as the final place. Maybe that's a kind of local exception. And this was actually addressed during that process, and each of these places were considered from the point of view of financial income. And the Jarosław building was rejected due to the state of preservation. In the case of Staniątki, it's actually presented as a place being sounded out, but it was rejected because the Benedictine nuns already there, they were too numerous and they would be unable to welcome such a big community. And then Lubin near Poznań appeared, and that was also a post-Benedictine place, so it actually was adapted to the needs of the community, and so they would be supposed to run a kindergarten there for underprivileged children using the language of the documents, or they would perform other activities for the local community, apart from running that place for the Center for Underprivileged, or orphanage as they called it at that time. And so they sounded out the possibilities of earning a living, but we have to say that the Lviv Benedictine nuns, when they came to Krzeszów, there was a different Benedictine community there. There had been one, at least, displaced in May '46, but they were a male community, so they could still run a parish. But so apart from this gender difference, basically, eventually, a nearly identical community entered, a monastic community. So it's clear that since the first one was able to earn a living differently, they went away. But basically, the next generation, the next community replacing them would be able to earn a living there too. So the Code of Canon Law actually set forward the rules, but actually, the authorization of the Holy See is necessary for the transfer, for the replacement. So actually, the archive of the Benedictine nuns in Krzeszów lacks such an authorization. It's not there. So this authorization to close down the monastery, the convent in Lviv. So I'm saying this with full awareness. It doesn't mean that the authorization was not there, that it hadn't been given, but knowing the specificity of such places, one must not rule out that after some inquiries, investigations, searching the vast archives, which are not readily available, these church archives, maybe such a document will be found. But since this document is lacking at present, we must assume that a formal authorization was not given, actually, and this displacement itself, this resettlement, actually happened as a result of a piece of advice given by Eugeniusz Baziak, bishop, who basically suggested that Prioress Szymańska, after all, proceed to registration with the whole community, and consequently that they proceed to go to leave for the West, and only until the end of December the Archbishop recommended that they register. And so this can be treated as the formal start of resettlement of the whole community. And so earlier they kind of searched for the places, whether Jarosław and Lubin and Staniątka, by correspondence, and the community actually just left a couple of nuns who obtained a special authorization from the prioress so that they could go west to find a place. And then they proceeded, after obtaining the authorization, they intensified their efforts to eventually depart and go to Lubin, as they thought they were going to Lubin. They eventually did not arrive at Lubin, as a result of an intervention by Karel van Ost, because to preserve the buildings in Krzeszów, Grisau at the time, for the Benedictine family, he actually directed the Benedictine nuns who were already there in the West to Lubin, and then he redirected the rest of the convent to Krzeszów. So essentially we can say that he is responsible for all the formalities which allowed them, in accordance with the canon law, to establish this abbey in Lower Silesia. The Code of Canon Law actually says that to open a monastic community, they need a monastery or convent, then they need the Holy See's approval, and they also need an authorization of the ordinary, of the bishop ordinary, and to see whether this community is really necessary in this particular place. And here the solution appears. Karel van Ost, he wrote to the apostolic administrator, Karol Milik, who explained his decision about the redirection of the nuns to Krzeszów due to the evacuation of the Benedictine Abbey near Kamienna Góra, and due to the prior's wish, I let it be known to the Benedictine nuns from Lviv that they could relocate here. Karol Milik, probably the apostolic administrator, who, well, is not the ordinary of the place, right? And he, well, did not have the authority to issue this consent. But a document surfaced eventually, or a notice to Mother Superior Szymańska, where we welcomed this community in the new area, but it's doubtful whether it was formally consent to this. But formally, the process ended in when a letter came for primate who actually wrote that as a result of the authorizations of the Holy See for special monastic matters, endorsing the and in compliance with the relevant request on the 26th of August, I hereby consent to a new abbey being canonically erected in the county of Kamienna Góra in Lower Silesia. And this is how the resettlement ended. But in terms of the works done, well, the obligation to work in a Benedictine monastery or convent is actually crucial, because Saint Benedict wrote in the rule that you know, the otium is actually something that is wrong for the soul, and so idleness, in other words. So now the question of stabilitas, this constancy, stability in behavior, can be linked to run in the kindergarten, but that's also more intensive work for the whole parish, where one can see the start of a process called, you know, the transformation towards sisters working for the sake of their parish around which they are gathered, and this is a process that gains momentum later. As part of this work, this community will really earn the respect of the local community, and the local community could basically encounter some sort of you know, regular life, or maybe not monastic life, maybe not stabilization or stability, because you can't talk about that in 1946. Thank you, I'm out of time. A very interesting paper, and I believe there will be a lot of questions. At least I have a lot. So let's see what happens next. And
Pani Emilia.
So we have Emilia Dziwiecka. By the way, I heard that she was not here. She was supposed to deliver a presentation on Holy Mary paintings brought from Eastern lands. Well, we are not satiated here, but we have Tomasz Dachowicz from the China Museum, who's going to be talking about the relationship between Catholics and of Polish and German ethnicity at the Wałbrzych in the first 15 years following the Second World War. I'm definitely not going to speak too much, but I will start a lot. So in the Wałbrzych land, Catholicism was a sort of a platform for meeting encounters of Poles and Germans, especially. Priests were obviously very important in this respect, this heavily industrialized area, especially Wałbrzych, and towns in the vicinity that are now one urban fabric. By the end of 1950s of the 20th century was one of the biggest centers for Catholics of German ethnicity in Lower Silesia. There was a significant part of the German community that stopped here on account of maintaining the very smooth operation of mines and other industrial plants. The very strength of Catholicism, the Catholic denomination, is confirmed by statistics. In 1929, there were more than 55,000 Catholics that accounted for more than 30% of general public. The ground that I call the Wałbrzych land actually overlaps with the land district, and it used to correspond to an area where an entity corresponding to the Polish Dekanate actually that was functioning here since 1861, and that it was. There was also a network of parishes, 12 parishes actually. There were 39 priests. This number was changing at the end of a war. There were at least 25 clergymen here. The Polish people that come to the Wałbrzych land after the Second World War were provided with certain specific good material conditions in order to start settling here. Now, Polish Catholics could actually count on services, pre-services, because there was the Latin procedure provided mass, and obviously most of the priests knew Polish tongue, and some of the priests, some of the clergymen from Upper Silesia, and they used this language in the family home as well as when contacting with their neighbors. The knowledge of the Polish tongue was enabled by Cardinal Bertram from Wrocław, who, at the stage when a seminar was being created, ensured that to clerics. The knowledge of Polish was simply necessary in a Lower Silesian clergyman. In 1945, in the area in question, there were at least 3 priests that used Polish language, the Upper Silesian, of Upper Silesian descent. First of whom was priest Father Józef Sikora, the last pre-war priest to the Wrocław Polish people that actually was a priest in Sokołowsk. It was probably him that serviced Polish coerced workers employed in the Mieroszów plants. The other clergyman was Father Alfred Dudek from Czarny Bór. But also served to the Poles that were working at the farms there. There was a third person, a Palatine of Upper Silesian descent, a secretary to the Gdańsk bishop, Ruka, and then the first priest, first clergyman at the parish of Legnica near Gdańsk, and actually the contemporary district of Gdańsk. He was displaced to Lower Silesia because he was collaborating with Poles. Immediately before the Polish government's plenipotentiary took over this land, that's precisely what happened. The first Catholic priest of the Polish origin was Stanisław Grabowski from the Archdiocese of Krakow, who came to Wałbrzych on the 4th of August. There are more documents that are analyzed concerning the relationship between Catholics of Polish and German descent that come from the first years of post-war times, the clash of different cultures and the clash of different nations that actually shared the same denomination. The Prosecution's standpoints that were very clear and distinctive and important in the relationship between clergymen of both nationalities and people that were faithful to the priest, even though they were using a foreign tongue. However, there was a sense of being a victim of the war and a very human factor. The documentation relations from witnesses generally comment upon the social relationships that evolved as time passed in this period. Difficult accommodation conditions in the first post-war month were not conducive to good relationships being built, were also not conducive to good relationships with the clergymen. The parish in Pogórze, that was in the Pogórze region, was simply virtually impossible. Father Klemer was living separately, while Stanisław Grabowski, who started to be the priest for the Polish, ethnically Polish Catholics, could not find accommodation. We don't know the reasons why, but it may be a similar situation to the nearby Boguszów, where at the actually there were 50 refugees kept at the presbytery, actually, plus he was living there with his sick father, and a vicar was also there. In those 16 units of organized clergymen services, there were about 22,000 Catholics of German ethnicity, lived, serviced by 19 priests. After World War II, there were just 8 of them, and as far as laymen are concerned, well, we don't know that yet. The parishes left without the priests, were actually subject to the care of clergymen from the nearby parishes. Kalor Milik, administrator, the apostolic administrator at the Lower Silesian, as requested by Deacon Stanisław Grabowski, establishing them as vicars for the people of German ethnicity, and they were German priests. Those operating at the Curia obviously were coordinating the priesthood for the Catholics of German ethnicity. The relationship of the first dean to persons of German ethnicity is clearly seen by the Elżbietowy nuns. At the beginning of 1946, were actually running a kindergarten for German kindergarten at the Pogórze district. On the 2nd of March 1946, a representative of the communal association told the nuns to leave their convent within 20 minutes. They were deprived with private possession, they were persecuted, and one of the officials actually appropriated of their personal belongings. After the invasion of one of the Poles, as the report says, the officials abandoned the displacement of the nuns. And they were stressing that obviously they would come on another day to remove the nuns from the place. Father Grabowski forced the starost of Wałbrzych to actually discontinue this displacement process, to return the property and to punish the official, the clerk that actually persecuted them. And should they be displaced, they would be provided with the right to actually keep their property and be assisted by a Polish clergyman that was supposed to prevent any offense or any maltreatment to the nuns. They themselves decided to stay in this area, and they were trying to trick the authorities. Those who decided that one should not be replaced by Bows, who was actually delivering sermons in German, but it was translated into Polish. But that was something that was considered very badly by the Polish Catholics that were simply not accustomed to actually being served by German-speaking priests. In 1946, in a parish of Saint Angel's patrons, during the masses, actually, what increased was also the attendance. And Father Grabowski, on writing to the administrators, the apostle, claimed that one clergyman cannot capable to listen to the confessions of all the penitents there. He also mentioned Father Antoni Wycisk. The penitents were not satisfied by the very fact, and just out of necessity and the lack of other clergymen, they were confessing to him. However, they were leaving their confession unsatisfied, which was not the case of German Catholics. Actually, I ordered a certain gardener to cut some trees, fell some trees. Actually, he refused by saying that he would do what his former parish priest told him to, because it is necessary that he is satisfied once he comes back. Another parish administrator, he noted that masses were actually avoided, were shed, as well as the communion delivered in Polish, in the parish of the St. Guardian Angels. He also wrote that the Polish parish priest was ignored, and not even the dean was respected. The Germans were completely uncontrolled, organizing choirs, fundraisers, which was unsatisfactory to the faithful people of Polish origin, and was teasing with the lay administration. So it was him who decided when and where masses would be delivered to the German-speaking person. What was then delegated, this right was delegated to members of the parish who knew the conditions of their communities. According to this government, the afternoon masses for German people were supposed to be silenced without sermon and take no more than 50 minutes. They were also explaining that the lay administration tend to explain to the clergymen how everything was supposed to be solved, which was actually endangered by some sad consequences to both Polish and German Catholics. With time, these restrictions were loosened out, and the German Catholics could actually enjoy the freedom of using the language of their heart. In September 1946, the Catholics of German origin living in the area covered by the parish of St. Francis of Assisi, their situation was rather positive. They could obviously attend Mass at 7:30 with German songs, with the Evangel being read out in German language. Every second day, the German priest was frequenting and listening to, accepting the confessions. But they were also served by Polish priests. Fathers Palatines actually were very important here because they were also serving to the Polish immigrants. They knew the German language and they knew German mentality, including Father Sobieraj. So who wrote the following? From the perspective of the Christ's mission, I'm not excluding them from service, serving them as they like, including in the confessional. We'll also get to know how it was organized from the reports of Father Babiak, who used to work in Wałbrzych at that time. Germans initially actually had very negative affection towards me, but once they knew me and when I served them in the church, I was delivering masses, the relationships towards me changed completely, especially when Father Hunt left and someone else handled masses in Wałbrzych, a German Jesuit father, in which time they were so gracious to me, for my favors to them and how I served them. And sometimes when they were deprived of the priest, at certain Sunday, the Polish priest still was able to deliver the Mass. What should also be stressed in particular was Father Józef Krysowski, former secretary to the Archbishop Wilczewski from the Lviv Archdiocese, who, starting from 1951, functioned as the administrator of the parish of Gorce. At the same time, a Benedictine father of Krzeszów, Niklas von Luterotti, served the German-speaking part of the parish people. They obviously used to together study theology in Innsbruck. They know one another. Knowing German tongue very well, he helped the German priest and accepted confession of the community due to a very serious sickness of von Luterotti. Krzeszowski was actually replacing for him, substituted for him, delivering masses to the German-speaking people, and German Catholics claimed him to be decent and faithful friend to their community. Poles called him a saint priest, and for Luterotti, until his departure in 1953, he was actually a devoted friend. There's also Father Mirolik, who was an apostolic administrator, described the situation like this. I come to the Boguszów parish, I am welcomed by Polish children, providing poetry in Polish, children from French in French, and children from Germany in German. I'm approached by Father Grüning, a German priest, and asks me if the baptism is going to be the confirmation is going to be delivered to German children separately from the Polish ones, and I said no, because they are supposed to be delivered confirmation together. Plus, I want to deliver a German sermon to the German part of this community, and so happened. It also translated into the relationship and approach towards churches and their furnishing, especially the churches encountered once resettled. The post-German temples, unfortunately, they initially the clergymen were not accustomed with, but gradually that changed. Obviously struggling about the German tradition, also including certain German inscriptions and epitaphs in those temples commemorating those fallen in the First World War. Plus, there were some other transitions in terms of the furnishing of individual churches. The clergymen encountered what was quite surprising to them, namely the roosters that were on the towers of the local churches, which they did not understand. But they decided to follow along, but they considered them to be actually a manifestation of paganism. On account of a low attendance in his church, one of the fathers decided that maybe the cock would actually discourage them from coming to the church. The Poles of the Wałbrzych parish, especially with the cult towards the Holy Mother Mary of Częstochowa, it was obvious that Polish people brought some holy paintings from the east, including of Our Lady of Częstochowa. As the settlers, by founding altars, they wanted to ask the patron for protecting this part of the western frontier. This altar was consecrated in 1946 by Father Milik. It was very popular, with priests from the entire deanery coming to this mass. But obviously, the officials treated this completely differently. And this is a quotation from the book of the most important developments in Wałbrzych. The church was not supposed to be given the nature of polyethnicity. The predominant part of the German-speaking community has to realize that we want to feel and establish the strong link with the rest of the country and show the people of German ethnicity that we are the hosts, and by no means shall we be expelled from this. I'm not going to quote a statement from another clergyman. You can obviously read in my article if you like, but I'm running out of time dramatically. So I would like to highlight the very tense relationships in terms of Lothar Hebs, the Polish poet of German descent, who lived in Wałbrzych up till 1962. He chose Polish school. Germans could not go to schools. They were deprived of this opportunity. So he chose this school on account of his friends. He was beaten up by other boys that would go to German school. After a while, they reopened the school because he was condemned as a traitor. As he was leaving this school, he was still beaten up by the Polish kids because he was a German. He was a Schwab. Now, obviously there are histories of heroic clergymen of German descent who serviced in Wałbrzych and the local parishes with Father Liebelt, the entire Kłodzko valley. He had his family there, and they were praised. Actually, they were praised by the Polish clergymen, but also they were appreciated by laymen as well. In the archives of the Institute of National Remembrance, I found a note that this father was actually provided help to Cardinal Wyszyński in those years still. And on the very final note, I would really like to refer to two more figures. One less important and the other very important. Third being Walter Karigek, who was helping to Father Liebelt. And when he was not there, the other one was not there, and people were dying all the time. He was actually serving, he was handling the funerals, and he claimed that the hostility of the first post-war times between Germans and Poles, and they finally became friendly neighbors. And the funeral speeches that I delivered in my mother tongue are also translated into Polish. And I was welcomed by the Poles who also participated in German funerals because they were addressed as they would be neighbors, cohabitants, colleagues, even friends. Funerals were held in Wałbrzych at district of Biały Kamień, in Kuźnice, in Boguszów. On the ground of these relationships, people obviously got married, assimilated, and Germans actually gladly learned the Polish language. And just for the very end, I would like to introduce the following two events that happened in the Wałbrzych region. First happening on the 19th May 1957, where Karol Milik came there, invited by German Catholics. He was visiting the deanery of Wałbrzych, and to this congregation, he was actually delivering a mass in the parish, in the church of St. Francis of Assisi, and he was mentioning the relationships of the Upper Silesia when he was, which he inhabited as a young person. He said that Poles could be neighbors to Germans. And please conclude. So I conclude, special attention must be paid to German Catholics, and it was actually by the bishop who came there for the second time to Wałbrzych when Father Liebert was living. He came there to bid him farewell and introduce his successor on the 2nd October 1959. And with his very presence, he triggered a sensation because he came there completely unexpected in times where such visits were actually announced in due advance, and the local community was really surprised when Bishop actually left this tiny church, and then he simply went to the German clergyman where he actually was served dinner. And bid farewell to his colleague, but that was before 1965, obviously. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention.
Proszę Państwa, jest czas na krótką dyskusję.
Okay, there's time for a brief discussion, so I hereby open the floor to interesting papers, so the floor is yours, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, there is someone. Thank you, Milena Słuchańska from the Regional Museum in Lubań. I would like to ask both gentlemen, because my paper kind of dovetailed with your papers, gentlemen. So I would like to point to the role of the apostolic administrator, Karol Milik, who appeared in this parish and with the resettlement of the Benedictine nuns and helped the nuns of St. Mary Magdalene. Well, they decided to stay behind and they did not resettle. So I wanted to ask you, what's the Benedictine convent like nowadays? I didn't have the opportunity to visit Krzeszów. A book has been recently published on the 75 years of the Benedictine convent there, and there's an association, so statistically, 40 arrived. How many are there now? That's a question for Mr. Bijak, actually. And my next question, what happened to the weathercocks or to the depictions of roosters? Because actually I know this topic more or less because my godmother married a German. So when did those cocks disappear? Let's have the answer. As far as the Benedictine nuns in Krzeszów today, we can say that they are still there, just as they arrived in 1946, actually, but the number is smaller, there are around 18 of them. But we need to point out that the property status changed of the Lviv Krzeszów convent, because if we look at Krzeszów as a whole and we see the Baroque layout of the church, including the church buildings and the other structures, so we have the monastery gardens, and that's where they focus their work now. And this is just briefly, we could go on and on about it, about what's going on there, but we have to kind of condense it, obviously. Okay, I'm about to answer. After analyzing the iconography, well, there were at least 3 cocks, weathercocks, mind you, on top of the spires. And the one we saw in Pieskowa Góra on Biały Kamień, shown here, just a design there. And another one in Podgórze, in the Church of St. Francis of Assisi. And well, the cocks are no more. They disappeared. When? Probably in that period. Well, 46, 47, and at this point it's worth saying that even in Wrocław, for instance, the Holy Cross church in Ostrów Tumski has this huge weathercock, and it didn't offend anyone. So maybe the clergy just realized that it was, after all, a Christian symbol functioning for ages, for centuries, placed on church spires, symbolizing the call. There are various interpretations, you see, so we need to look at Christian symbolism. But I will just give you 2 interpretations. The first one says that well, this is supposed to be related to Saint Peter, and well, when the cock crowed, the Saint Peter, when Saint Peter denied the Christ. So that's the kind of overtone it has. And another more prosaic explanation: the cock crows in the morning, and the day comes, the day dawns, the battle between light and darkness. So there you go. And that's the kind of symbolism, just like the candle. And you know, that's the weathercock for you.
Chyba na tym głosie zamkniemy. Ja pozwolę sobie chciałem zadać jakieś pytania, ale już może w kuluarach, bo przerwa kawowa nam ostatnia właśnie już minęła, ona się kończy, a może się Państwo jeszcze chcieliby...
So maybe you would like to grab a cup of coffee. So maybe just for the speakers, just look at the terminology in the two papers. Convent and monastery. These are two different terms, and I believe that kind of disappeared. Stabilitas loci. I wouldn't actually reject that. But following Karl van Ost, his interpretation of the Benedictine rule, I believe it's worth looking at the Benedictine tradition. Stabilitas loci is not the stabilitas as such, it's stabilitas loci. Transferring of abbeys, it's something that happens, it's not impossible. For instance, you know, the St. Mary's Abbey in Wrocław on Piasek, it actually was transferred, and the Bliskie from Wieś Kościelna. This is all historically justified, but we are talking about the Code of Canon Law of 1917, and the fact that there is no Holy See document. Well, one cannot prove on the basis of the absence of sources. This is really poor evidence, the fact that there is lack of evidence, but there were some special authorizations, and they could actually the Primate of Poland, that's where you should look in his secretariat, in his secretary's office. So Karol Milik, he wasn't a bishop, but he had the powers of an ordinary. So basically, apart from the obligations named in his nomination decree, well, he wasn't a bishop, but it doesn't mean that he didn't have the tools an ordinary has. And just a word I don't know what Wałbrzych is like, but the patrocinia, whether it is changed, but and we'll talk outside. But about the priests, the Silesian priests, the whole verification action and obtaining Polish citizenship, I don't know if they were actually Germans or Poles. Well, what kind of Silesians they were, how they identify themselves. So I understand the one priest perished in 1945, and I don't know, did others attempt to obtain Polish citizenship? By suspend this and let's take a break, and over a piece of cake we can eat some coffee, and in a while we'll have the final panel, and I do invite you to that, and this will be held moderated by Professor Sirnik, the Deputy Dean of our Faculty of Historical and Pedagogical Sciences. So 20 minutes tops, okay, let's start then.